Nous avons besoin de votre aide. Nous devons dire un mot.
Not every show gets a second season. Not every show even gets a second episode. The 1970s gave us some of the greatest sitcoms ever made, but it also buried dozens of them before most people ever had a chance to tune in. Today we're going through 10 of those forgotten casualties. The sitcom graveyard of the 1970s. 10 shows that failed fast. Number 10, Me and the Chimp, CBS, 1972.
What's a monkey doing on the court?
He's our mascot, Dad. He'll bring us love.
Let's start in 1972. CBS was coming off what television historians call the rural purge, the mass cancellation of shows like Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, and the Beverly Hillbillies that had been perfectly popular but skewed toward older, rural audiences. The network was desperate to attract younger, urban viewers, and their answer to that need was a sitcom about a suburban dentist living with a chimpanzee. Me and the Chimp premiered on January 13th, 1972, and it was produced by two men who would go on to define the decade, Gary Marshall and Thomas L. Miller. Yes, the same Gary Marshall who would later give us Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. But in 1972, they were still finding their footing, and this was very much the stumble. The premise centered on Dr. Mike Reynolds, played by Ted Bessel, whom audiences remembered warmly from the long-running ABC series That Girl, whose ordinary suburban life is turned upside down when his kids bring home a chimpanzee named Buttons. Buttons, the show explained across the course of the season, was actually a washout from the space program, though the Reynolds family didn't even know that fact until an old army sergeant turned up to break the news. Most episodes revolved around Buttons creating chaos, scrawling on maps, stealing alarm clocks, generally treating the Reynolds household like his personal playground. It didn't connect. Ted Bessel reportedly had deep reservations about the project and a famously tense working relationship with the chimp, who was by all accounts extremely difficult to handle on set. Getting the animal to perform even simple scripted behaviors required exhausting amounts of time and patience from the crew, and the results on screen rarely justified the effort. The show had actually gotten off to a rough start even before production, when Bessel refused to participate at all until the original title, The Chimp and I, was changed. He found it grammatically disagreeable. The title was changed to Me and the Chimp. The problems were not solved. There's something almost poignant about the disconnect between who Gary Marshall was and what this show was. He was a genuinely talented comedy writer and producer. He'd worked on The Dick Van Dyke Show and The Lucy Show before striking out on his own. Me and the Chimp was an early, misfiring attempt to find a family-friendly audience. 3 years later, Happy Days premiered, and then Laverne and Shirley, and Marshall spent the rest of the decade producing two of the biggest sitcoms on television. The Chimp detour turned out to be a brief, unfortunate chapter in a long and successful career. CBS aired all 13 produced episodes between January and late April 1972, and the show was not renewed. TV Guide eventually ranked Me and the Chimp at number 46 on its 2002 list of the 50 worst shows of all time. Not the worst position on that list, but firmly, unmistakably in that company. Number 9. The Texas Wheelers, ABC, 1974.
See that bag? Boo, what'd you put in this bag?
Just a few things for the trip.
Here's one that stands out from the rest of this list because it wasn't terrible. In fact, by most accounts, the Texas Wheelers had genuine heart. The tragedy here isn't the quality of the show, it's the scheduling. The series premiered on ABC on September 13th, 1974. It was a production of MTM Enterprises, the same company responsible for The Mary Tyler Moore Show and The Bob Newhart Show, and it was created by Dale McRaven, who would later develop Mork and Mindy. Set in a fictional rural Texas town named Lamont, the story followed the Wheeler family, 4 kids who had been left to raise themselves after their mother died, and their father, Zach, walked out looking for gold and a good time. The oldest, Truckee, played by a young Gary Busey, had stepped up as the de facto head of the household, working odd jobs to keep his siblings fed and housed. Then Zach came rolling back, played with weathered charm by veteran character actor Jack Elam. One of those Wheeler siblings was Doobie, played by a 22-year-old actor named Mark Hamill, 3 years before Star Wars made him a household name. At the time, Hamill was genuinely hoping the Texas Wheelers would be his breakthrough. He poured himself into the role, and people who did see the show remember his performance fondly. The show was placed on Friday nights at 9:30 p.m., going head-to-head against the second half of NBC's The Rockford Files. one of the biggest hits on television that season. It was a brutal time slot for a quiet, character-driven comedy, and the numbers reflected it. The Texas Wheelers ranked 81st out of 84 shows for the 1974-75 season. ABC canceled it after just 4 episodes in the fall of 1974. 4 more episodes aired during the summer of 1975 as a kind of half-hearted second chance, but 5 of the 13 produced episodes never aired in the United States at all. Hamill later said he was caught completely off guard by the cancellation. He had genuinely believed in the show and was blindsided when it ended. A few years later, of course, a film called Star Wars arrived, and whatever door the Texas Wheelers was supposed to open became completely irrelevant. Number 8. Grady, NBC, 1975 to 1976.
I take 1 step forward and they take 2 steps backwards.
Sanford and Son was a phenomenon. From its debut in 1972, the NBC comedy about Fred Sanford and his long-suffering son Lamont, running a junkyard in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, drew enormous Friday night audiences and helped redefine what black-led comedy could look like on American network television. Red Fox and Demond Wilson were a genuinely extraordinary team. So when Red Fox temporarily left the show during a contract dispute in the early years, the series leaned heavily on the supporting cast to carry episodes. One character who rose to fill the gap was Grady Wilson, Fred's absent-minded, good-natured older friend played by Whitman Mayo. Grady became a genuine fan favorite during that stretch, which led NBC and the producers to the conclusion that he could anchor his own series. Grady premiered December 4th, 1975. The premise took the character out of the familiar Watts environment entirely. Grady moves to the Westwood section of Los Angeles to live with his daughter Ellie and her husband and their family. Red Fox made a guest appearance as Fred Sanford in the very first episode to help generate interest. Norman Lear stayed on as a consultant. It all seemed sensible enough on paper. The problem was that what made Grady endearing as a supporting player on Sanford and Son, his easygoing, gentle manner, his tendency to be slightly confused about what was happening around him, didn't give writers enough to build an entire series around. Without Red Fox's volcanic comedic energy to bounce off of, without the junkyard and the specific rhythms of that world, something essential was missing from every episode. The new suburban setting in Westwood felt a long way from where both the character and the audience's affection for him had come from. The supporting cast around Grady in the new show was genuinely strong. Carol Cole, daughter of the legendary Nat King Cole, played his daughter Ellie. A young Joe Morton, years before his film career took off, played Ellie's husband, and Haywood Nelson, who played one of the grandchildren, went directly from this show to a recurring role on What's Happening the following year, which proved to be the hit that Grady had failed to be. But strong individual performances can only carry a show so far when the central concept isn't working. Viewers sensed the gap. The show never found a solid footing, and NBC canceled it after 10 episodes. The run ended March 11th, 1976. Whitman Mayo went back to Sanford and Son, and the following year he was pulled into yet another spin-off attempt, one that fared even worse. Number 7. Mr. T and Tina, ABC, 1976.
Good luck in Chicago, shorty.
This one deserves a moment of genuine acknowledgement before we get to the failure, because whatever its flaws were, Mr. T and Tina made genuine history. The show premiered on ABC on September 25th, 1976. It starred Pat Morita, widely beloved at the time for his recurring role as Arnold, the cheerful Japanese-American diner owner on Happy Days, as Taro Takahashi, a Japanese inventor who is sent by his company from Tokyo to Chicago to establish an American branch of operations. He's a widower with 2 young children, and he hires an American woman named Tina Kelly, played by Susan Blanchard, as a live-in governess. The comedy was intended to grow naturally from the cultural collision between Takahashi's traditional Japanese sensibilities and Tina's freewheeling American personality. Mr. T and Tina was a spin-off of Welcome Back, Kotter, in which Morita had briefly appeared in the season 2 premiere, and it holds a genuine footnote in television history. It was one of the first American network sitcoms ever to center on an Asian American lead and feature a predominantly Asian American cast, a distinction that predated comparable shows by nearly 2 decades. decades, but the execution collapsed almost immediately. When TV critics were screened the pilot in June 1976, they collectively voted it the worst new show they had seen that season. According to writer Mark Evanier, who worked on Cotter at the same studio facility, ABC had already identified what would replace Mr. T and Tina before the series even went to air. The show was essentially filling a slot until its replacement was ready. Only 5 of the 9 produced episodes were ever broadcast. ABC officially canceled the series on October 30th, 1976. Roughly 5 weeks after it started. Morita joked about it in a later interview, saying he asked why they got bad ratings and was told it was the time slot. And then when he asked why the time slot was so bad, he was told it was because too many people were still awake. Pat Morita, for his part, more than recovered. He received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor for The Karate Kid in 1985. Number 6. Holmes and Yo-Yo, ABC, 1976.
Alex, je sais ce que Kincaid a fait de la Grambini. Sortir ce genre de choses doit être très difficile.
Holmes and Yo-Yo landed at number 33 on TV Guide's 2002 list of the 50 worst shows of all time, 1 spot below Co-Ed Fever, and a distinction it earned through a combination of misplaced ambition and deeply unfunny execution. The show premiered on ABC on September 25, 1976, the same night as Mr. T and Tina, both on the same network. It was executive produced by Leonard Stern, the man who had made Get Smart a genuine classic in the 1960s, and you could see his fingerprints on the concept. Stern was reaching for that same kind of deadpan, gadget-heavy absurdist comedy, transplanted into a cop show setting. The premise: Detective Sergeant Alexander Holmes, played by Richard B. Schull, is a fundamentally accident-prone officer who has sent so many of his partners to the hospital through sheer clumsiness that his superiors quietly solve the problem by assigning him an experimental android partner. That partner is Gregory Yoyanovich, Yo-Yo for short, played by John Schuck. Yo-Yo was a marvel of fictional engineering. 427 pounds of crime-fighting machinery with a photographic memory, perfect aim, an internal trash compactor that could digest virtually anything, and a built-in Polaroid camera in his nose that would print photographs of whatever he was looking at and eject them from his shirt pocket. Yo-Yo was not without his quirks. He picked up a Swedish radio station on his internal circuits whenever it rained. When his systems overloaded completely, he could only repeat the phrase "Bunko Squad" on a loop until someone managed to reboot him. A female colleague named Officer Maxine Moon developed an inconvenient romantic interest in the android, who was, regrettably, not programmed for that kind of response. Stern told the press that he was building something in the tradition of Abbott and Costello. The audience didn't agree. The show drew consistently weak ratings, and ABC canceled it in December 1976 after 11 episodes. 2 remaining episodes were eventually burned off the following August in a late summer slot where nobody was watching. Holmes and Yo-Yo lasted barely 3 months. The concept of a robot cop partner did eventually find more traction in other forms. ABC's own Future Cop appeared the following year with a similar premise, and the idea kept surfacing in various guises through the 1980s and beyond. But Holmes and Yo-Yo itself is remembered today almost exclusively for its spot on that TV Guide worst of list, and for the phrase "Bunko Squad" echoing pointlessly into silence. Number 5. The McLean Stevenson Show, NBC, 1976 to 1977.
Okay, now I got you. Hey, don't hit me with that thing, okay? Please. Oh, man, I knew I should...
McLean Stevenson's story is one of the most frequently told cautionary tales in American television, and it earns that label, not because it was scandalous, but because it illustrates something painfully true about the difference between a beloved character and a beloved actor. Stevenson had played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake on MASH from the very beginning. He was warm, broadly funny, fundamentally decent, and enormously likable. When the show's producers decided to write Blake out by having his plane shot down over the Sea of Japan at the end of season 3, one of the most genuinely shocking moments in the entire history of American television, viewers were devastated in a way that felt real and lasting. The cast themselves didn't know Blake was going to die until they were handed the scene's final pages moments before filming. The reaction to Blake's death was enormous, and it cemented the show's place in American culture. Stevenson had left the show voluntarily. He wanted to be the lead lead in his own series rather than a supporting player in an ensemble, and NBC came to him with exactly that offer. The McLean-Stevenson show debuted December 1st, 1976. He played Mac Ferguson, a hardware store owner in Evanston, Illinois, living in a multi-generational household with his wife, his grown children, his grandchildren, and his mother-in-law. The premise was warm and domestic and utterly unremarkable in every way. The production reportedly went through significant behind-the-scenes turbulence. Original episodes were scrapped early in the run, cast members were replaced, and the show was rushed to air before it was ready, with new episodes being finished and broadcast almost simultaneously. The network's bet was that audiences who had loved Henry Blake would follow McLean-Stevenson anywhere he went. That bet was wrong. The show drew modest early numbers and declined from there. NBC canceled it after 12 episodes, only 10 of which actually aired, ending its run on March 3, 1977. Stevenson later put his finger on exactly what went wrong, as honestly as any actor could. He had believed that everyone in America loved McLean-Stevenson, when what was actually true was that everyone loved Henry Blake. He went on to star in several more short-lived series over the following years. In the beginning in 1978, Hello Larry starting in 1979, Condo in 1983, and none of them found an audience. He never stopped working, but he never found another show that came close to what he'd walked away from at MASH. Number 4. The Sanford Arms, NBC, 1977.
There's so much I had to tell you. My daughter, she moved back to Chicago.
After Grady failed to keep the Sanford and Son universe alive, the next sensible step might have been to let the franchise rest. NBC did not make that choice. In 1977, Red Fox departed Sanford and Son to host a variety program at ABC. Demond Wilson followed shortly after, in a dispute over his expected salary for what would have been a Lamont-centered continuation. That left NBC with a hit franchise, all the supporting players, the sets, and none of the stars. The Sanford Arms premiered September 16, 1977. The show explained to audiences that Fred and Lamont had moved to Arizona for Fred's health and had sold their Los Angeles property to Phil Wheeler, a widowed old army buddy of Fred's, played by Theodore Wilson. Phil moved into the old Sanford house with his two teenagers, Angie and Nat, and set about trying to convert the rooming house next door, the Sanford Arms itself, into a functioning hotel. The familiar supporting players returned: LaWanda Page as Aunt Esther, Don Bexley as Bubba, Whitman Mayo as Grady, now written as a married man, alongside his new wife Dolly. On paper, keeping those familiar faces on screen was supposed to give audiences something to hold on to while the show found its footing. In practice, Phil Wheeler was a brand new character who had no established history and no chemistry with anyone around him. Aunt Esther and Grady had been brilliant as reactive, supporting characters built to bounce off of Fox and Wilson. On their own, they couldn't generate the same energy. The attempt to transfer the warmth and comedy of the original to a new lead character with none of those built-up relationships simply didn't work. NBC pulled the Sanford Arms after only 4 of the 8 produced episodes had aired. The run ended October 14, 1977, less than a month after it began. The remaining 4 episodes sat shelved and largely unseen until 1991, when BET eventually aired them in reruns. What's remarkable in retrospect is that this was the second failed spin-off attempt in 2 years from the same franchise. Grady had already come and gone in 1975 to 76, and it would not be the last attempt. A revival called Sanford, featuring Red Fox but not Demond Wilson, would arrive in 1980, and it too failed quickly. The Sanford and Son universe kept reaching back for what had made it special, and kept finding that it couldn't be reconstructed once the original partnership was gone. Number 3. Flatbush, CBS, 1979. By early 1979, 2 cultural waves were still running at high tide: the working-class disco energy of Saturday Night Fever and the anarchic college comedy that National Lampoon's Animal House had unleashed on audiences in 1978. Networks were scrambling to ride both currents at once, and CBS decided to schedule 2 new shows back-to-back on the same Monday night to cover both simultaneously. Flatbush premiered February 26, 1979. The series followed 5 young Italian-American men living in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn, named Presto, Socks, Figgy, Joey, and Turtle, who called themselves the Flatbush Fungos and got into misadventures involving work, romance, and the various eccentrics of their neighborhood. The cast included Joseph Cowley, who had appeared in Saturday Night Fever 2 years earlier, and a then-unknown Adrian Zemed. The show's writer, Dennis Palumbo, described trying to channel the spirit of the Italian Marx Brothers. The problem arrived before the third episode was even done airing. Brooklyn Borough President Howard Golden publicly condemned the series, telling the press it was unflattering to Italians, Jews, Hispanics, and police officers. The New York Times critic had already called Flatbush and its companion show that night inexcusably infantile in situation, dialogue, acting, and production. CBS canceled Flatbush after 3 episodes had aired, ending its run on March 12, 1979. 6 total episodes had been produced. 3 never aired in the United States. The Flatbush Fungos were gone from American television almost before the audience had time to learn their names, let alone their nicknames. Number 2, Highcliffe Manor, NBC, 1979.
Woman around will never sell our plan for cloning the world's leaders.
Speaking as a scientist, my advice is make tracks.
This one is the strangest entry on the list, a show with an actually interesting premise that simply could never figure out what it wanted to be. Highcliffe Manor premiered on NBC on April 12, 1979. The setup, Helen Black, a recently widowed woman played by Shelley Fabares, inherits a sprawling Gothic mansion on a desolate island off the coast of New England. The mansion is home to the Black Foundation, a research institute established by her late husband, and it is populated by one of the most peculiar collections of characters ever assembled for a sitcom. There was a mad scientist named Dr. Francis Kisgaden, a bionic man named Bram Shelley, his name deliberately constructed from Bram Stoker and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, a womanizing preacher, a sinister housekeeper, 2 evil doctors quietly working to sell instructions for cloning world leaders to unnamed foreign interests. Each episode was narrated by Peter Lawford. Ernie Hudson was part of the supporting cast, 5 years before Ghostbusters would make him a recognizable face to audiences everywhere. The show drew its evident inspiration from Dark Shadows, the gothic soap opera that had developed a devoted cult following in the late 1960s. Blending horror atmosphere with sitcom comedy is an interesting creative challenge, and it's not inherently doomed to fail. The problem with Highcliffe Manor was execution. It was too dark and strange for audiences expecting traditional sitcom rhythms, and too broadly played and scattered to function as genuine gothic satire. It fell into the space between categories and never climbed out. NBC had ordered 6 episodes. According to contemporary accounts, only 4 of them actually made it to air before the network ended the experiment in early May 1979. The remaining episodes were never broadcast. Highcliffe Manor's entire run covered barely 3 weeks on the NBC schedule, and then the lights went out. Number 1. Co-Ed Fever, CBS, 1979.
Pardon me, little lady. Can I change that tire for you?
This is the crown jewel of the sitcom graveyard, a show that was dead before it ever had a regular time slot. Not canceled after a rough season, not pulled after 3 weeks, canceled after 1 single preview airing. Co-Ed Fever was the third of 3 Animal House-inspired frat comedy series that hit American television in early 1979. ABC had Delta House, NBC had Brothers and Sisters, and CBS had this. All 3 were attempting to bottle the enormous box office success of National Lampoon's Animal House from the year before. All 3 were off the air by the end of April 1979. The show was set at Baxter College, a formerly all-female school that had just gone co-ed, welcoming 250 male freshmen into a campus of 2,400 women. The story focused on the residents of Brewster House Dormitory. The cast included Heather Thomas, David Keith, and Alexa Keenan. 6 episodes were produced in total. CBS chose not to premiere Co-Ed Fever in a regular time slot. Instead, they aired the first episode, titled Pepperoni Passion, as a special preview on the night of February 4th, 1979 at 10:30 p.m., immediately following their broadcast of the film Rocky. The logic was straightforward. Rocky was going to pull a massive audience, and perhaps a portion of those viewers would stick around. What happened instead? The ratings were catastrophically low, the critical response was openly hostile, and complaints from viewers and network censors piled up over the show's content. CBS made its decision quickly and definitively. The planned premiere date of February 19th arrived, and something else aired in that Monday night time slot. Co-Ed Fever had been canceled in the window between its preview airing and what would have been its official debut. It never had a second night on American television. 5 of the 6 produced episodes were never broadcast in the United States. They eventually aired in a late afternoon weekend slot on a regional Canadian network in Vancouver, though exactly how that arrangement came about has never been fully explained. Back in the States, the Brewster House dormitory set didn't go to waste. It was quietly repurposed later that same year as the girls' dormitory for the first season of The Facts of Life. In 2002, TV Guide ranked Co-Ed Fever at number 32 on its list of the 50 worst shows of all time, a list that included dozens of programs that had at least managed full seasons or multiple seasons before failing. Co-Ed Fever earned that ranking on the basis of one preview episode, one night, done. It sits on that list right above Holmes and Yo-Yo, which at least had 11 episodes to make its case. In the entire landscape of American television history, it would be difficult to find a faster path to lasting infamy. The show became, in a strange way, a kind of monument to the limits of trend chasing, a reminder that slapping a familiar formula onto a familiar setting does not make an audience show up, no matter what movie happens to air right before it. 10 shows. Some of them had real promise and simply got buried by bad scheduling or impossible competition. Some were chasing trends they couldn't quite catch in time. A couple were genuinely strange ideas that somehow made it all the way through development, production, and onto the air before anyone thought to ask whether they were actually working. What all of them share is how fast it happened. Television in the 1970s didn't give second chances easily. A bad premiere, the wrong time slot, 1 week of crushing ratings, any of it could end a show before it ever found its footing. And once a network made that call, these shows simply vanished. No streaming service to give them a new audience, no YouTube clips keeping them in circulation, no cult following to speak of. They went into the graveyard and mostly stayed there. The 1970s gave us some of the greatest sitcoms ever made, but the ones that didn't make it deserve their own kind of remembering too. If you enjoyed this trip through forgotten television history, go ahead and give the video a like. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. And if you want to keep exploring overlooked shows, buried classics, and everything else lost in the decades of American TV, hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.